Hey, welcome to Scratching the Surface. I'm Jarrett Fuller, and this is a podcast about questioning the brief. Eddie Opara is on the show today. Eddie, of course, is a Pentagram partner. He joined as a partner in 2010, where he's worked on projects ranging from design to technology to strategy for both cultural and corporate clients. Before Pentagram, he ran his own studio, The Map Office, and was a designer at Imaginary Forces and at 2x4. This conversation with Eddie was really interesting to me. We talk about Eddie's very early desire to push up against and question and subvert the briefs and assignments and projects that he was given in school, and how this thinking and this kind of desire to push beyond what was asked has shaped his entire career. We also talk about what he learned from Michael Rock in his time at 2x4, who was his teacher and then later his boss, and what it was like to join Pentagram and the challenges that come with that, and kind of figuring out what kind of work he wants to do there. This was a surprisingly profound and personal conversation, I think. I really appreciated his honesty and found this deep questioning that Eddie does of his work both inspiring and encouraging. I found myself thinking about it long after it was over, and I hope that you like it too. Remember that if you're a fan of the podcast and you want to help support it, you can become a member for just $5 a month or $50 a year. Members get an exclusive monthly newsletter that features behind-the-scenes content, links, and articles from former guests about design and writing and criticism, as well as previews of upcoming episodes. Scratching the Surface is fully supported through these memberships, so if you'd like to help with the ongoing production of the podcast, I hope that you consider joining. Thank you for listening, and enjoy this conversation with Eddie Opara. The last couple of weeks, as I was preparing for this, thinking about you, thinking about your work, I was reading a bunch of interviews that you had done, watching talks, and you said something a couple times that I thought was interesting that I kind of want to start with, where you talked about when you were in school that your professors were kind of confused by you or confused by your work. You've told the story multiple times of Michael Rock calling you enigmatic, and I kind of want to start and talk about that a little bit. Do you know, what was it about your work or about you or your approach that was so confusing to people?
In all honesty, I really don't know. I think it was about the aspect of the brief that I would never, or the actual scope of the work that one was sort of introduced to by that lecturer, that I would never adhere to the full extent or even any of the extent of that particular scope. Yeah. And or I would look at it as in a sort of create an antithesis of that scope. And so on a few occasions, the lecturers would question me and then just say, this is, in a sense, they didn't even say that this has got nothing to do with the scope. They would say, this is different. And, aloof, and I was like,
yeah. Where, I don't mean to psychoanalyze this or get you to kind of do too much introspection, but do you have a sense of where that came from, or why you were even trying to do that?
I often think that it came from the aspect of reading a scope and then just having this idea, but the idea is a total misinterpretation of the scope itself.
So you don't even know if it was you purposely trying to do something else, or it was just you read it and you thought it was this other.
Literally.
Okay.
There was also certain times. This is not connected to Michael at all. Where when I was at Yale, I think it was my first year, I was, we were asked to take some some text from a famous any sort of famous copy body of work, and represented in a sort of a codex form.
Right.
And I think that's sort of the fundamentals of the project. There's more to it. And what I recall is that I was going through a transition. I would say, or say an evolution into what we now call UI UX.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Design work, basically interactive work, and I was having a lot of fun there. And I like the idea of the non-hierarchical aspect of it. And so I sort of exploded the idea of the book. It was still physical.
Yeah.
And I had found I'd found all these sort of back in the 90s, all these sort of semi-opaque film capsules.
Oh yeah.
And I had sort of printed out, designed the bodies of the text, the excerpts of the text, rolled them in, put them into the actual capsules, and the capsules were at least the same, pretty much the same length of this.
Okay.
About 20 feet long.
Okay.
And I designed this sort of this balsa wood missile that they would actually be put into, and then where we Yale Graphic Design resided, which was at 212 York at the time. They had this beautiful spiral staircase that went all the way up. You could sort of see from top to bottom. And I had my review in the staircase. And so what people would do at certain parts of the staircase would actually pull out a piece of the capsule.
Interesting.
And certain parts of the capsule would drop down, and then you pull out another one, and then you read it. And there was this really great discussion, and this is something that was interesting. I think there were certain critics there, reviewers there, that were just mystified by this approach. Some others were like very intrigued, and they started having an argument or constructive
between each other.
A very constructive conversation, but it was like quite raucous, and I was like loving it. I loved, and it felt like this. I loved an argument, and how critics can actually be like one's against and one's for.
Yeah.
And I loved that more than anything in the world. I loved it more than a whole bunch of critics actually saying this is fantastic.
Right.
I just love that those two forces come together, and so because one side is saying this is total crap, and this is not a book, this is not codex, this is not this, this is puzzling, and on the other side it's like this is puzzling but it's fascinating and intriguing, and so like just putting those two things together is, I felt as though that was very interesting.
And it's interesting, and we're probably going to jump around your career a little bit and not follow your career linearly in this conversation, but talking about Michael Rock calling you enigmatic, and then he later would hire you, and just to kind of set up the question that I'm going to ask you is, I think Michael Rock is a designer who has probably influenced how I think about design and the type of design I want to practice, probably more than anybody else, if I'm honest.
Well, he has. I mean, Michael is well versed. He's incredibly articulate.
Yeah.
In his ideals and objectives.
Yeah.
I think at the time I was sort of like a novice.
Okay.
If you think about it, and I think now recalling the reason why I called me enigmatic was that I had also created a book that you had to sort of tear open.
Oh,
and the idea of I wanted to see the frustration.
Right.
The method of so then again the sense of interaction.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, why why do you have to do?
Yeah.
Well, he didn't really say that, but he's like, this is really, very enigmatic personality. And as he's going through the work, and I'm like, this is good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that
Yeah.
started to answer the question that I was going to ask you, is because I feel like his approach is similar to what you're talking about, especially in kind of taking a brief and really trying to figure out, well, what is this actually going to be? And I think especially kind of early 2x4 work was really pushing the kind of conceptual boundaries of what their projects were. And I was kind of curious what you...
still does.
Yeah.
I think, I was at lunch with him about a month ago, less than a month ago. And, again, it's amazing. He's always questioning the aspects of what graphic design is. And thus the idea of the boundaries of that. And he's also saying is what 2x4 is doing or what he's doing graphic design anymore? Potentially not.
Right.
And I find that really interesting.
Yeah. Well, what did you learn about your time there? Because I think you're exactly right, and I think the way he thinks about it is right. But there also is a very clear commercial angle to it, and I think that balance is so fascinating, and the sometimes tension there. And I think you're somebody that's kind of doing that too, especially talking about that early work and work you're doing now. There's a clear thread there, and there's a clear kind of tension there. What did you learn about kind of, talking about being a novice maybe when you're in school? How has that evolved for you?
I think, at the end, Michael hired me after my time in Boston for 4 years, and then I was in Imagining Forces for about a year.
Yeah.
And I asked him, about, and he I thought I'd known that he wanted to hire me some years back, but I think I recall the term was like a fucking waste of talent.
Okay.
Maybe Michael thinks slightly differently, and that was with my friend George Pesco. And I basically was at my sort of wit's end. I was very sort of I didn't know where to go next, and he gave me that sort of passage, and Susan and Georgie gave me that passage to do that. But the thing about 2x4 back then is that, and it's probably the same now, hopefully it is that it's very collegiate in its sort of approach.
Oh, interesting.
And when you're there, it did feel like you were still not being schooled, but you were still within a sort of an educational, appreciative, critical thinking atmosphere, and that was really nice. That was a comfort zone right there.
Right.
And it's really enriching where you see a principle or principles not just look at, and to answer your question in regards to the aspects of graphic design, it is a commercial based entity, a profession, right? That you got to make money,
right.
So, but they want to make money in a specific way, and I really love that fact. I think one of the things about 2x4 is that they have probably one of the best portfolios and client lists in the world. It just keeps coming, and they have this great expansive idea of what design can actually be, and their main focus was we're going to deal with art and architecture, but they've stretched that, and I find that to be, and art and architecture is quite wide. I find that to be impressive. And they've done it better than anybody.
Yeah, well, and I don't want this whole conversation to be you talking about
that's all right.
about 2x4. But what I think is interesting about what you just said is you joined Pentagram in 2010, and I remember when that was announced. I was in my last year of college.
Oh, okay.
And I remember finding it interesting. I was somewhat aware of your work, but I thought, this is kind of weird. He's a different type of Pentagram partner, especially what kind of the way Pentagram was thought of 10 years ago now. And I don't think it's as weird now. And I don't think it's that you've been molded into whatever a Pentagram partner is, but I think it's that, like what you were saying, these ideas of what design is have changed. And so now the kind of work that you were doing seems very normal. Can you talk a little bit about that kind of trajectory and transition over these last 10 years?
Yeah, so, I was, ran the map office, principal of that. And in all honesty, to make ends meet, and I never really showed this at all to anybody, I would do a lot of luxury real estate work. And trust me, everybody has those items in the closet, right?
Yeah.
Our approach was sort of very mixed media orientated. We had built our own content management systems. We had built our own, which also worked like a task management system as well.
Oh, interesting.
We had sort of developed sort of different ideals of what educational institutions should look like. That's what we were dealing with UCLA architecture and things like that. And we had worked with Studio Museum. That was actually a gift from Singapore. That's the last time I'll talk about Singapore. And also I wanted to sort of impress on this idea of a community, a family of sorts, in that office. And there's a longevity of designers that have gone through there that are still very good friends today, and some of them are still with me.
Right.
And so, moving over to Pentagram, the model is very different.
Right.
And it's things that go a lot faster. There's larger project work that you wanted, that I wanted. It's myself. And I think it's actually been better, where I've actually expanded my ideals of the type of work that I've been sort of doing, because I had not done sort of very large corporation work at all. I continued my cultural work, started dealing with a lot of startups, and a lot of designers could sort of like, I can relate to that, to that. But I also worked on, with MIT architecture, with robots making cocktails, building out large screen systems that are on par from Blade Runner that you can actually walk through, building out these sort of map systems that are sort of, you could say they're personal work, but they're actually not. They're sort of cartograms that are actually introduced into pretty much nearly any project that I'm dealing with. So the idea of language,
right?
So I started maturing, and my language and visual reach has gotten better. And I think there's also this aspect of dexterity that I'm really interested in. I think that, and maybe other designers do not think this, but I think that if you want to start talking about the overarching aspects of graphic design, you need to do pretty much all of it.
Right.
And so if you want to be critical, you need to have that expanse.
Yeah.
And more.
Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting, when you were hired at Pentagram, I remember a lot of the kind of story around it is that you were the interactive partner, which, in retrospect, again, feels very reductive.
Not correct.
Yeah.
And I think that was, in all honesty, something that was in my head. And maybe in others, and I needed to get that out. And so
back to that enigmatic, pushing the brief thing.
Pretty much. And I would talk to my partners a lot about this, and I think it came to a head about 5 years, 6 years.
Interesting.
Actually, 4 years ago.
Okay.
Right? It took me that long.
Yeah.
to basically say, no, I'm not. This is not what I want to do.
Right.
This is. I've started looking at, you could say, interactivity in an entirely different light. There was constant websites.
Mm-hmm.
They're bloody boring.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's very rare that you get a website that just intrigues you, apart from the content itself, right? From the design standpoint. It is so structured. It is just dealing with the rudimentary things you'd think are fine. You've got great coders, and then, it doesn't work on that platform. And you're just like, I really hate this. This is not design. This is something monstrous. And it takes it sucks your creative juices. Constantly.
I've definitely been there. I know exactly what you're talking about.
When was the last time you've been to a well-known, visual communications conference or talk that dealt with on the main stage that deals with like interactive stuff, as in web? In web, there is absolutely none. That's god awful. So I think, I said to myself, no, this is not going to happen. I sort of reduced my team, took out the developers, and I now am sort of rebuilding that.
Oh, interesting.
I've been rebuilding it for a few years to see where we're going with it.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I had this this idea that was based on a job that I did that my team really liked and the client really liked, and I felt there was something missing from it. And I said, I really got to start doing my own work again. And I sat down and I designed this clock, which is a lot of people say it's just a clock. I said, no, this is not. No, you could say ordinary clock. It's just a beam of light in a circle. Actually, 3 beams of light in a circle. The seconds move in the time that the second moves in revolution, and then the longhand and shorthand are different lengths. And
I see.
On the same beam of light. And so you're like, huh? So another puzzling thing.
Right.
But when we built it, and this is just at the tail end of my developers sort of leaving, we were like, whoa, this is different. We should go in this direction to do work. And I started thinking about it when we actually built the whole thing. It's like, we're not industrial designers, are we? But we did this. We're graphic designers. Why is this so interesting to us? And I'm not saying that graphic designers should be industrial designers, but I think that we should start to stretch our limits more. So, and I think that's what Michael has done. I didn't say sorry. And I think other graphic designers are doing that. We it's not that we can't sit still. We should integrate ourselves into so many different design professions. And I find that to be impressive. And then we can start to talk about them more. We can start to be more critical about or praise them. And thus it allows graphic design to elevate itself onto another level that others have not really sort of seen. We're a very quiet crew of people. And what I don't like is when we troll each other, come up with crude names for the work that your fellow designer has done. Keep it to yourself, crying out loud. It doesn't help. It doesn't push our profession forward. It only puts it in the dirt. and I fundamentally think that we are missing a lot of critical writing that we all need to ingest and become better at what we do. Thus, we can relay that to our client.
Yeah. You said two things that I think are really interesting that come up on the podcast a lot. One is this idea of kind of the boundaries between these different forms of design falling away. And then the second one is how do we talk about this stuff, especially when it's getting more complex, more confusing. Everything's starting to kind of interact with each other anyway. And I think you're right. There's half of design discourse, or there's a group of design discourse that is trolling, that is just tweets and, this kind of fast...
Trumpian.
Yeah. That's great. Exactly. And then there's this other side that is, in my opinion, kind of masquerading as criticism, but is really just kind of like glorified PR in a sense. It's just, here's some images of some work and here's a little quote from the designer. And I get the sense from you and from this conversation that you think really deeply about your work and about the profession. I like to think that I do too. That's the type of writing and discourse I want to see. Can you talk more about what type of discussions you want to have as you're talking about this and saying what you want to see more of? What does that look like to you?
Well, I think I sort of indicated just a little bit of that, where we need to talk more about our own language, descriptive vernacular. I've been giving talks of late about, when I retire or before I die, I want to look back on my life and see that I've not just achieved certain things, but I can explain what I've achieved to myself.
Oh, interesting.
And to others.
Right.
So if I have a very curious young person that comes over to me and says, can you talk about not just your life, but just your design and what that meant and through the ages and distinction in a distinctive way, one has to start to think, I wasn't just a graphic designer that just wanted to make money. Or let's put it this way, in a better light, I wasn't just seen as a commercial.
Right. I know what you mean, yeah.
And there's value to what I've done, and also there's branches that can interconnect, and now you can see that type of work occurring in another designer, whether he or she. And I think that's, and also the idea that it may have changed people's minds about how to do some things. And it comes down to how your work is functioned, how it's communicated, but especially the overarching composition of pieces of the vernacular, the language that you're trying to relay. And I would then say to the crowd who's started thinking about the types of values and properties and qualities that are actually in your work. Have you ever started writing those down?
Right.
And I think that people should actually do that first before they actually start writing a critical piece. So if you start to know yourself in a particular light,
they should write down their own values and their own before they write. I see.
Design, and what they're sort of not so much. It shouldn't be written in a way like a standard branding POV. No, it really shouldn't. So I start to look at it as a spectrum. You could say a frequency.
Right.
All sorts, and like what's within that frequency, what's fluctuating, what's sort of ever changing, and what sort of indicates, what are the specific touch points within that frequency that really allows me to create the language that I do. Then I can relay that language. To my team or to my students, in a way, so it leads up. And I find that to be a major missing link. I also look at myself as a tinkerer. I tinker a lot.
Oh, interesting.
In different areas, and I think that's the sort of puzzling thing that I'm trying to unravel. It may take me a longer time to unravel my own self than somebody else, but everybody should try to do it. I think it's very important.
I want to know more about what you're talking about, how that. I have two questions around that. How is that affecting the work that you're doing?
Yeah.
And then also, how are you actually doing that type of reflection? Is this actually your writing? This is, I assume it's part of the kind of talk. Is some of you doing really, that? How does this all?
Yeah, I haven't, the only writing I've done is when somebody forces me to write something. And I was forced to write a book on color.
Oh, right, right.
Well, I shouldn't say forced.
Yeah.
I think it was really more about, do you want to write a book? And I'm like, I don't know. Should I? Sure.
Yeah.
You'll be good at it. I'm like, okay. And I did. And it was about color. It's really basic principle, best practices kind of thing. So it really doesn't relay my type of writing. I have written certain short essay types of things before. People seem to like, but very rare. I think it's really definitely coming from these lectures that I'm doing, and I assume to myself that one day I will put all this together, and it will all make sense and bloody better.
Yeah.
But in the long run, just like any type of business, one wants to look at yourself every 5 years. What's your 5-year plan?
Yeah.
And I'm coming to that point of the next.
Right.
And so, my last year was a very good year for me. We could say even this year has been a very good year, and I've been taking on more high-end branding work. As possible, but I'm like, but am I making any difference? Is my language within their language?
Right.
And I think that's very questionable. And I brought this question up in sort of like in a very distasteful way with my team that have got that they got slightly upset about. I won't go into the details. But I'm questioning, are we making any difference to us? I'm definitely making a difference for that client, but there's nothing new.
Yeah.
That I think that we're moving ahead, we're evolving, and so we are trying to now. I believe we're trying to now inject that into the work that we're trying to do and achieve.
How do you? I don't mean for this question to sound so kind of reductive and businessy, but how do you measure that difference? And I'm asking this purely selfishly as somebody who has these types of conversations with designers all the time, thinking very deeply about my work, and then I'm also like, is this looping back to the design work itself at all?
Absolutely. I think, one project which I can't talk to you about, but with, I'm excited to do it, and the team's excited to do it. Some of them are on that job. We're trying to invest things like machine learning processes in regards to the output of the designs. Now, this work is actually not in the American market.
Okay.
It's not in the European market. It's not in the Asian market. So go figure. You've got another 2 continents to think about, or 3. We're quite intrigued about what the outcome is going to be, because we want to use machine learning processes to develop, to further develop them, and their you could say their message is like looking towards the future, and it's like, okay, this is great within an area, within a market that's like, really? So that's very interesting for us, and hopefully we'll succeed. So in a sense, we're we haven't just jumped on the bandwagon of the machine learning. There was a project that we failed in, that I failed in, I think personally, that we built for a school up in upstate New York that dealt. It was like an visual Alexa.
Oh, interesting.
Amazon Echo
system
for the school, and what it would do is that it would take in all the information about the school, which is a very sustainable school. So there's a lot of data that you can actually pull in from the building management systems, and then you can declare that to the audience. But then the audience is K through 5. So how do you do that? You have to simplify the approach, the language that you're utilizing. But then, they always say kids are incredibly visual. Yes, they're incredibly visual, but they also love to hear things.
Right.
And so we built 8 different units that hung on the walls, and you could talk to them, and they would generate quizzes, and they would show you more data, and it was really impressive. Even the concept was lauded by the principal's school. But the reason why it hasn't worked is because of firewalls. Anyway, this is partly, I believe it's partly my fault, but it's also IT that gets involved. But the aspects of machine learning was there because the system needed to understand a 3 to 4 year old, and how they're speaking to the system.
Right.
And that was amazing. And so we got to do this again, but can we do it on a different level? And so this, my team is not new to these items, and it's unfortunate I'm not going to relay this project yet on the Pentagram site, but maybe one day they'll forgive me. And I really honestly mean that. I think they were fantastic, and somehow I have to help them out. But then there's all these sort of trials and errors. So the idea of looking towards the future with looking at machine learning processes is important. Mm-hmm. Not just having a client that deals with machine learning, but like the possibility that a client that may not even heard of machine learning AI processes that will put into this this particular aspect. So looking towards that is important to us.
I could talk to you about that for another hour easily. My last question, this is a question that I used to end all of these conversations, and I've really enjoyed kind of hearing you reflect on your own process and kind of what you want out of design. And the last question is, I'm curious, who are the people or the books that have really kind of influenced this approach? Are there people, if somebody's listening to this and they're like, I want more of that, where do you point them?
It just depends upon the day and also the conversation.
Okay,
really. There's no major aspect. Sometimes I bring in articles on Economist or or something on the New York Times or from the Guardian. That helps. Sometimes I bring in like a novel that I've just been reading and say constitute that this is interesting. Look at this particular line. These are the types of things that, in regards to other designers or other people, I think that Bjarke Ingels is interesting, and I know him. The way that, if you look at the way that he presents, he's an incredible presenter. But not the way he talks, but like the way he breaks things down. You're actually looking at somebody who fundamentally understands communication and visual communication.
Right. Yeah, totally,
really well.
Totally.
And so when you're trying to, and you start to see some familiarities with his stuff that you have, and you're like, that's kind of how a graphic designer would do that.
Yeah.
And you're like, holy crap, it actually is. And in a sense, it's not just him. You look at Rem Koolhaas.
Yep.
And the things that Rem actually had learned, I would say more from, I will say it again, too, I thought, is, there's a cyclical aspect to these particular principles. And that's just one fragment of things. I'm a person that doesn't like to be like an art director, that creative that sits next to a designer and then the designer's sitting, working away and pointing. I don't do that. It's like shift over because I forgot my pen and pad and here, let's do this. And I like to bring up things. Screen. I like to start designing the whole thing so they can actually sit down and have a drink and chill out for a bit because they've just been sitting at the screen for forever. I think it's necessary. Just yesterday, like 7 o'clock, I was asking our interns, like, hey, how's your 3D? Because I want them, when they come in, I was like, so do you know this, you know this? Have you done any sort of 3-dimensional work? And it's not like the tools. It's really more understanding the principle of 3D and the importance of that to the work that we do on a day-to-day basis. And they're like, no. I'm like, okay, we're going to show you. And like, really? It's like, yeah. You should spend an hour, maybe 2, shooting the shit at home, maybe, TV's on, and you're mucking about with it. But then you can come in, and if you don't know something, I'm going to show you, or one of my team is going to show you how to do it. And so I sat there for an hour, and I started showing them certain principles of this particular program to a certain degree. But it's fundamental to anything you do with 3D work, just to get them infused a little bit more about it. And I feel as though, that's kind of what I want to do. I started off designing, building social networks in 1997. Moving into motion graphic pieces and doing large environmental graphic pieces, understanding 3-dimensional work and interaction. Move into cultural work and so on and so forth, and now corporate work and all that combined. Everything before,
And I feel as though I want to impress that on my my teammates as well. I think it's very important. Thus, we can actually have a clear say in all these areas and also be critical within all these areas without sort of creating some type of interpretation. And you have no experience in it whatsoever. You're talking about it as total crap.
I love that. I feel like that's a perfect way to end this too. It kind of brings this conversation full circle. Eddie, thank you so much. I love this conversation. I could keep talking to you about this stuff. Thanks for your time. Thanks for being on the podcast.
You're welcome. Yeah, thank you.
This episode was recorded on July 16th, 2019 in New York City. Our theme music is by Andy Borgasani. We're on Twitter and Instagram at Surface Podcast. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts and at scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.